Welcome to Accountants Forum in the series number 7. Today we'll talk through 2 trust scenarios end to end. Agnieszka will be here around regulatory framing. Welcome, Agnieszka.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Hi, everyone.
Hopefully we're back bigger and better than ever for today's, and we'll have a couple of little announcements at the end. I'm Clayton Wood, co-founder of Seamlss. Also, I run my own accounting firm, and when I'm moonlighting as the co-founder of Seamlss, that's also what I do. And obviously, Ags is the AML expert. Really appreciate her time today, sharing those insights. So, beneficial ownership in trust is where that real line sits. And I think that's always a bit of a challenge for firms, as trusts can be a little bit different compared to the beneficial owners of a company and who are the directors, which is always handled by ASIC. Not just because trust CDD is harder, but because the language can be a little bit more convoluted and not exactly the same in every trust. So I'm not sure how many trusts you've reviewed over the years, Ags, but some trusts go back 50, 60, 70, 80 years. And those trusts that were written on a typewriter can be quite different to the ones that we get today that are written. And that's why it's always a bit of a depends, isn't it, when it comes to trusts?
Yeah, and look, and I think from a trust perspective, I mean, the core challenge is that beneficial ownership in a trust sits quite different than in companies, of course. The ownership percentages are less structured. You may not know them. So the key kind of baseline questions to ask is really, who controls the trustee, who holds the power to appoint or remove them, and who holds any direct or indirect decision-making influence. So we have 2 case studies coming up, one simple family trust and one complex corporate with a corporate structure with like an offshore footprint. So the key thing is that you need to follow the steps through for whichever type of entity that you're onboarding. And this is really a bit of a deep dive into trusts overall. Yep.
Yeah. So 2 different. We chose those complexities because I think most will sit in the Anderson family trust position, where they're fairly simple setups and structures and checks, whereas the Chen group will be a bit more complicated, and we're just trying to do a bit of a different spectrum on each in that regard. Same sort of steps through the process.
Yeah, just and just to add, right, from an operational point of view or workflow, you're not reinventing the wheel with every time you do this process. The process is the same. The compliance workflow is the same for every client type. What changes is the depth of information that you get, whether it's going to be straight through processing, for want of a better phrase, whether the technology will be able to tell you everything that you need to. So it's standard due diligence, not simplified is something slightly different. Standard due diligence with simple structures where you have a low risk client and the information is readily available. The decisioning will follow the actual process flow, versus the more complex structure where you'll still follow the flow, but you need to do collect greater amount of information, ask more difficult questions, and then there is that risk judgment that you need to apply. And that's what I was saying last time. It may be that you never have those type of clients. It may be that you see them in 1% to 5% of all your client types. You may not see one for a year. But the thing is, you need to understand when you do have one, and you need to know what to do when you have one, because that's where the risk lies.
What does that process going to look like? Love it. And when the risk is low, it makes it a lot easier, doesn't it? Whereas with the high risk, there's obviously more complexities to the process of stepping through your AML procedures to make sure that you are factoring in foreign settlors and deceased appointers, and succession could get more complicated, and understanding what happens when you get those high risks, and the standard CDD is off the table. Enhanced CDD just is a little bit more work, and someone needs to know how to step through that and understand those complexities.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you hit enhanced due diligence, you obviously need to do the AML co needs to approve that customer before you can provide any services as well.
And Ags has sort of mentioned that every client will go through the same 7 steps every time, depending on how you're processing it. But you know, the risk rating is what will drive the fork on what process you're going to take. And you know, usually different risks are where it's going to change. And one of the standalone things really lands inside that risk assessment is that country risk, Ags.
Yeah, so just to kind of walk you through, we kind of walked through this last time. You have the inquiry, you understand whether you've got the designated service. The designated service is the tap that turns on your AML workflow, AML pipeline, and then really CDD starts. So that number 6 CDD, that's really finalized CDD, because CDD starts all the way up at step 3. And then the CDD, when you do identification and verification of the actual entity, as well as of your customer, as well as any beneficiaries and controllers that may sit within that entity structure, CDD already starts there, right? So CDD starts at step 3 and it continues throughout the entire flow, right up until the point that you make a decision whether you're going to onboard them or not. So you do ID&V. It's what we normally say utilize for identification and verification. The information that you gather then defines what risk rating you provide. So what are the parameters, or what are the bits of data that will flow into your risk rating that will define whether someone's going to be high, medium, or low. Country risk sits within that. That could 4 and 5 could be in one box called risk assessment. You have what countries do we have involved in the in your customer structure. What type of services we're providing? Are there any external are there any kind of other global indicators? Country risk kind of encompasses all the different countries that sit within your entity structure. What else? What kind of channel are they coming in? And what else do we have? So that's channel. Sorry?
Source of wealth and beneficial ownership.
So that comes later. So this is just the different parameters that define what risk assessment you're going to have. If you're low, the CDD can be finalized quite quickly, or even medium, but medium and then moving into high risk, you're going to have additional steps to complete CDD, and then you make a decision. And
I've tried to include in the slides this time just some little explainers of all the different acronyms that we use, because I keep forgetting them myself on some of the more complicated ones. But how do you identify the structure? Most accountants on the call will understand the different family trusts. So you've got a discretionary trust where the individuals are the trustees, which is less common. The settlor sometimes isn't known. It's sometimes some other organisation that might be settling it for you. The beneficial ownership chain might not exist in that regard. You might know who some of the key beneficiaries are, though. Whereas a discretionary trust with a corporate trustee, the big difference is there you've got the directors of the corporate trustee holder, and there'll be a shareholder of that as well, which someone's got to hold those shares. And then obviously the unit trust, which has probably got a corporate trustee as well. And that one's a bit more defined on the unit holders, because they are the beneficial owners, and that 25% of a unit trust is a lot more easier to identify, hence why it's not in today's chat. So we'll go through the Anderson Family Trust. We'll do a bit of a walkthrough on a simple one through the 7 steps. So they've come through as a new client lead and they say, I want a new discretionary trust. For some reason, you've determined that they don't need a corporate trustee, which I don't recommend, but I'm assuming some people might still do that for whatever reasons you've got. But the early on steps will lead you through saying, well, I'm going to set up a trust. I'm going to therefore be doing a designated service. So, trust formation, designated service turned on. We need to turn on the AML pipe, so to speak, and step through the process that you've got. And I think the key is just to make sure that whenever you're setting up an entity like this, that's what's going to happen. And then, as Ag said, the normal IDV. So if they're a new client, the IDV is just a part of onboarding. But if they're a current client, you would still do the IDV on those people, Ags.
Yeah, so essentially, as we kind of mentioned beforehand, so what you've got is a pool of clients today sitting on your books. That's your current book. You will have 1 July new clients coming on board. If you're providing them with a designated service, the pipe turns on. In that pool of clients, or the book that you already have, in the pool book that you have, if somebody asks you for a new designated service, so everything will just continue as it is. But as soon as they come and they ask you for a new designated service, something different that you're not providing them, you will need to put them into the AML pipe at step 3 and do the full workflow. If anything changes in that pool of clients, like they change their structures, they change any information, like if they have a new shareholder, if their structure changes in any way or the address changes, and you're providing them with a designated service, that is called a trigger. And that trigger also means that you start putting it through the AML pipe at step 3.
And the key with this part around trusts is definitely around the who of aspect. You know, the trustees, mum and dad, we're gonna do an ID check. The beneficiaries, it could be mum or dad or both, or it might have one of the kids. So if one of them are named, it's highly likely that you should be doing a IDV on anyone that's named in the beneficiaries of the trust deed. If over time, I think we talked about last week, if they've had a distribution in the last 3 years, then you should do an IDV check on them and a risk assessment. Same with the appointor and the settlor, if it's known and accessible. Like if they're obviously an inaccessible person and you don't even know who the settlor is, the risk is going to be low, and you need to note that down somewhere, Ags. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So what you need to do is, one of your obligations is obviously record keeping for 7 years. So the system that you have, Seamlss, needs to be able to provide you all the information at any future point. If you are asked by the regulator, AUSTRAC, to provide a customer file. So there should be, I'm sure you're building it in, Clayton, a space for you to put your reasoning in and your thoughts in. So if there's anything that's happened or any kind of interactions or any information that you've gleaned throughout your review, throughout conversations, you should be making sure that you're capturing that information in the system.
The why. Why did I make that decision?
Or any kind of information that helps determine what was the current thinking at the time, or any kind of data points that have not been already captured in the tool.
Obviously, the country risk is going to be pretty low because we're all in Australia, so it's not much risk there. So you can probably skim that fairly quickly, Ags, I'd say, for most simple family trusts in Australia.
Yes, your country risk is going to be low, but this whole risk assessment or customer risk assessment, it will be built in through Seamlss, where Seamlss will ask a couple of questions, and then that information will then determine whether you're low, medium, or high. Is that right, Clayton? As you are doing it right?
That's the goal. Yep, to make it easier.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, you want to automate that. And I think you'll need to probably answer some questions around parameters and your risk appetite that will help determine how those questions are segue together to create the high, medium, and low.
And then obviously we're going to get those answers back when we send off the AML check and the PEP and sanctions and things like that. And if it all comes back low, then we're good. The status is where you sort of, this is that bit where it's standard or enhanced, or it's low or medium or high as per AUSTRAC. Like if most of our clients are going to be low, we're going to move on to the next step. Make sure that everyone is being verified from the trustees.
You finalize CDD and you make sure everything is complete and you hold all the information. That's right.
Document it all. And the nature of it, and make your notes. And then obviously we're going to onboard, create the trust, build it, and then apply the 3-year cycle. I don't think that's correct on trusts, though. Is that right? Do you have to do it on trusts? It's only companies, isn't it? But you might.
No. Low risk, high, medium, low. High is annual reviews. Medium risk is 2-year reviews, and low risk is 3-year reviews. So that is all clients.
Right. Is that But that's only with ongoing services. So with that one,
Yeah, for
doesn't have a
ongoing
trustee
services.
company. If you had a trustee company, you would do the ongoing checks as a part of your ongoing assessment. But
Yeah.
if you don't, whereas the Chen group, we're going to onboard them, and they're as a new structure. They want a new trust. They've got an existing trust, which is a foreign settlor. So already some surface level options, things here going on where this is a complex, and you probably need to charge a bit more in fees to knowing that this is going to be complex setup and risk.
You will have elevated risk variables here, right?
Yep.
Because which will then culminate in a much different and deeper compliance overview of the information on this client and what they're proposing on doing.
When you're getting the inquiry, you're getting the lead, you're doing some triage of that person, you can start asking some of these questions to already formulate that known risk assessment of going, well, they've got a foreign company, or they're from a foreign country, where some of those triaging moments can give you some indication before you even accepting the client. Is that fair? So before we even start the
triage, triage is a good word. In financial services, in banking, in specifically, the risk assessment was actually done at a couple of different stages. You would do an initial risk assessment with the triage data, with all the data points that you have, which gave you one risk assessment. Then as you go through the process and you collect more information, that fine tunes your initial risk assessment, and that could change. You could go from low to medium, or even medium to low, or low to high. However your risk assessment has been set up and is operating, you can change that risk assessment throughout that onboarding process. So the more information you have earlier on, and the more and the clearer you are around that triage element, around what it is that you're looking for, understanding the red flags and what are the things that might drive you to have a high risk, absolutely helps you to determine sooner, like, why waste time on somebody that could be way out of your risk appetite, like earlier on.
Yep. And I think that's part of your determination as a firm of how I'm going to onboard and triage my clients. If someone's got a big old red flag of something like that, you might just choose, nah, not interested, go to someone else.
Yeah, as a compliance officer, you might want to have a conversation internally, and that's the age-old question, right? Does the risk justify the relationship and the provision of the service? Like, how do you want to balance it? You might want to take it a bit further because it's going to be a lucrative engagement, right? Banks have found that to their chagrin in the past. It's a bit different in this space, of course, but you may want to go to a point because it is lucrative. So, how far do you go? And for the information that you have, if it is lucrative, you want to go through to get all the information. But it's the AML Co's decision at the end, really, to decide whether the risk justifies the relationship.
Yeah. So, and then obviously going through from the inquiry, we've determined that we're setting up a trust. There's trustee services. There's a registered office for a corporate trustee. These are designated services. So therefore, item 679, I think, they will all point to you doing a designated service. So therefore, you need to do the IDV.
So it's just to add. So although you're providing 3 different designated services, right? Every single that service must be mapped, because not all services have the same risk assessment attached to it. So what you might need to do is look at the kind of cumulative exposure of providing these different services, right, over your engagement, because not every product and services that you provide is created equal. Some will have a slightly greater risk exposure.
Yep. And the corporate trustee in this case is owned by another trust, which you need to walk through that chain until you've found out who the natural persons are that own that other trust, corporate trustee.
Yeah, you need to peel the layers. The greater the complexity, the greater the levels, the greater the risk to you, because lack of transparency, more opacity. So you need to get to the jazz hands, arms and legs, as we say, of the relationship. Yep.
And so therefore, the settlors in Hong Kong, in this case, they've contributed a material amount of wealth to this new trust setup. The appointer in the old deed from the new corporate trustee, maybe they died, or maybe it's not clear on succession. This is a real sort of edge case. Like, depending on where you sit on reading that deed might also dictate whether you take them on, and those risks and what controls you put in. I think it comes back to reading that deed and really assessing who can you identify in the deed that has control over that trust, because they're going to be the trustee of the corporate trustee of our new trust. And I've said trust a lot there, but you need to get in deep with who the risk is assessed to and controlling interests of.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you cannot resolve ultimate control or ultimate ownership, you should not proceed with the onboarding.
Love it. Yep. That's simple, isn't it? Can't figure it out, just move on.
Yeah.
And look, this is a hypothetical. Please don't get lost in hypotheticals, blah, blah, blah. Like, we could go on all day about hypotheticals.
Yes.
The whole point is just going through the chain and, making judgment calls, like Ag said. If you can't work it out, maybe you just don't accept the appointment, move on. And maybe that's a part of your framework that you have instilled. Hong Kong, risk is medium. Foreign settler adds a layer of risk to the structure. So, and that's where Ags was saying the ultimate origin of the funds, so might come into play later. It just elevates that risk, and the nexus between them is the biggest accelerator from standard to CDD, from having that foreign corporate trustee.
Yeah, and you need to make, and when you collect all the information, it's stored, like all the details that you collect, every entity, whatever type, every individual across whatever role they have, all of it needs to be screened later on as part of your, to finalize CDD. Everyone needs to be screened against sanctions, PEPs, lists, adverse media. If you could set it up, Clayton, that you do adverse media on all risk types or just medium and high, whereas I know AUSTRAC has said high for high risk only, but you could actually, do adverse media. Or if you're not coming up as high, but you want to run an additional check, which I think, I'm sure you'd be able to do that, right, Clayton? They may not be, it may not be a high risk customer as yet, but it may be that someone goes, actually, I feel better if I do a full adverse media check. So you could do some additional screening to give you a little bit more peace of mind.
And knowing that you did what you could do to confirm what you needed to confirm. The biggest feedback for me from GBG was that a lot of adverse media has a lot of false positives. So you can go do that and you might get nothing, and therefore winning the risk is now I'm happy with the risk. You might get some of those false positives, and that means that it might come up higher, but you've got to read and research and be comfortable with proceeding with the engagement. Is that fair to say, Ags?
Yeah. Like if you have false positives across any of the screening types, and a false positive is where you have a match and you need to go in there to disqualify it. So when you go in there and you actually do the analysis and go, is my David Chen the same that was born on date X, the same as this David Chan or Chen born on this date? So you're going to, so there is some matching that happens at one level, but you need to put some, the human in the loop needs to come in and needs to assess whether that is the same person, or they might have the same birth dates, but they were born in two very different parts of the world, right? With the same name, random, but it could happen. So it takes time. Exactly. So it's
with a complex structure like this, Ags, there's multiple factors to it, and that foreign nexus could really impact to trigger it to a high level at any point, like the foreign settlor or owner or pointer or any of those aspects. Maybe they got one person had a PEP check, something like that. Like that automatically is going to trigger it into a higher risk category.
So if it's, sorry, can you say, when you say higher risk category because of a PEP?
CDD, going from standard to
enhanced.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Damn acronyms.
What's the question? Sorry, Clayton?
Sorry. One of those higher risk factors is going to trigger it from a standard to an enhanced.
Yeah, or the combination of them, right? So at that point in time, you will have additional work to do to make sure you really understand the nature, the purpose, and who that your client is, and whether they say who they say they are. I was going to say something about international countries, but I can't remember. Sorry, keep going.
Okay. So obviously it's gotten to the AMCO, the senior manager, someone that's got to approve this. I would assume it's the AMCO, someone with some approval authority.
It has to be the AML code. The AML code has to approve every enhanced due diligence. But just before you go there, I think that it's key to say it's source of wealth and source of funds across all the different types. And that's when you do your adverse media screening, and you perhaps will need to do additional verification. So you may want to get additional copies of the documents that you've already received, and they need to be certified. So if they pass electronic verification, you may then want to see the physical document, whether it's proof of address or structure of the or formation of entity or the individual. So this is where you really dig deep and dive into your customer or potential customer, and try to understand it with some more probing questions as well as data points.
Yeah, so all of these source of wealth and source of funds should be checked on all of the people, or just like the source of wealth and funds. Does that come from where the money's
for the entity? It's for the entity. So the entity is so your customer is the person, or potential customer is the person that you're doing the due diligence on. That customer has a range of connected parties, as we like to call them, which could be beneficiaries or controlling parties. It's the source of wealth and source of funds is on the entity. Where does the entity's flows come from? Not the individual source of wealth, source of funds, right? It's on the customer.
Yep. Cool.
And then the approval gate is only the AML Co can approve and enhance due diligence and confirm that you're happy to proceed with that high risk. The AML code cannot be overridden by another part of the organization, which is why it's important to have somebody as an AML code who has clout and who has decision-making capability. It can't be someone junior.
Autonomy, yeah. Autonomy that they said this person's not coming and we're not doing it, then they can't be overridden by the partner or the senior manager.
Yeah. They need to have clout. That's right. Yeah.
Different risks are reasons to not onboard someone. And I think that although some of these enhanced CDD triggers might come up later in the process, I feel like a good triage, you would probably try and sort of identify some of those possible triggers. Not to say you're not going to take them all on board, but it definitely make you be aware. Is that fair to say, Ags?
For what, sorry?
Like if you think about when you get to the enhanced CDD and whether you're going to continue on and take this person, you probably should have been aware in the triage process if they had overseas people and owners and things. Like if you had have asked enough questions there, it would have exposed you enough to say, do I want to build this trust and company, knowing this at the start, that it's probably going to lead to this position at the end. I think you need to optimize your conversation for the client to say, we need to go through an AML check here, and part of this process will determine whether we can continue on this engagement.
Look, absolutely. So there's a key aspect of this entire flow is how does this relate back to how you talk to your customers? Absolutely, right? So you're going to have to change your scripting as to what you say and when you say it and how you say it. In particular, as there's a tipping off, which is a criminal obligation now, where you cannot use specific language when you go back to your potential clients going, oh, yeah, we haven't onboarded you because there are risks, or we've raised an SMR to AUSTRAC. I mean, no, it's things like, you kind of, it may be stating the bleeding obvious, but, you're surprised how many people get it wrong. Like, you can't just go, oh, look, on the side, you didn't pass our risk, So there is some language that you can use, some very high level language. I'm sorry, you're currently, we are not able to take on your business. It doesn't pass our risk criteria. I've got some language points actually that I've designed. But essentially, it just needs to be very high level and not specific, and not focus on the financial crime aspect of it. It needs to be very generic language.
Yep. Love it. So the control. Like, and I think this is the problem with trusts. Like I said, like a unit trust, the 25% ownership is pretty easy to see. There's several people there you need to do CDD on, but definitely the control aspect is quite obvious and where it runs through. But when you've got a discretionary trust, which we have a lot of, the beneficial ownership, it's going to run through that control, and it's still just a risk profiling process. And that's how I sort of view it. Is yes, there is a steps to it, but it's a risk-based approach, which is what AGS has instilled in me after 7 forums, and that's what I feel like I've gotten the most out of here.
Yeah, I mean, that's what AUSTRAC have been really trying to instill in industry with these reforms. Absolutely. That it's not just a tick box exercise where we go, we just go through 5 steps, but it's really applying critical judgment on the information that you're presented with. When you're looking at number 1, it's really about the and, not or, right? It's a any connected party that sits across that the trust structure.
And the control, and it runs through beneficial ownership is the term. It's simple to point when you're talking about a company. It's very easy to identify that. With the trust, it can get quite complex, but it kind of, the control could be from the trustee, it could be from an appointer, alternate appointer. The settlor, I don't think has much powers beyond a trust.
The settlor doesn't, but yes.
We talked about this before. Like there are certain organisations that are like, you need to ID your settlor, and I'm like, well, the settlor's probably dead or non-existent, or I have no idea who they are from before.
Yeah.
But again, the risk assessment. We don't know.
Or they put some significant funds into it. I think over 10,000 they had to put into the trust initially, which then qualifies them to be screened. No, the term that I used before was connected party. Connected party is an umbrella term that talks about any kind of party connected or linked to your entity, be that a beneficial owner or a controller. So that's connected party is the umbrella term.
Love it. And even, the $10,000 thing, I think someone said it might have come from some AUSTRAC webinar or something. I don't know where this magical $10,000 number come from.
It comes from one of the rules of the Act.
Is it? I couldn't see it.
On the settlor.
Yeah.
For the settlor.
So
I did some digging on that a little while ago. I think it does.
Right.
Yeah, not in the Act. I think it's some rules, but I'll check that. Yeah.
I will check it. But at the end of the day, it comes back to that risk. If someone dropped in $2,000 or $5,000, if the risk is high, then you probably should have a look at that and assess it. But I think overall, this is where that 99.9% of trusts, the settlor is just not someone that matters because they've set the trust up and they've moved on and we don't even see them anymore. They're not appointers, they're not trustees, they have no control.
They have no control. Yeah.
That's the whole point of this. Terrorism financing and money laundering. That's the whole reason for AML. And if they have no control, they have no ability to do any of those things over the entity, then you have no reason to check it. So I think it's really about that. And then we get a lot of questions around beneficiaries. The beneficiaries is that other one where people are like, do I have to check all the beneficiaries? I've got hundreds of beneficiaries. Well, if they're named in the deed, you might need to, yes. But if they're not named, it's more, I think the guidance was over the last 3 years if they've received money from the trust. I'd also put in there, Ags, what would your thoughts be if someone received $1,000 and over the last 3 years, they got $1,000, but the trust is distributing millions? Like, would you check every single $1,000 person when they're getting like a menial amount? Again, risk.
I think you can take it whichever way you want. It just depends on your risk appetite, right? Yeah. If they're and the age, like if they're children, then no, right? So you need to look at entire. I'm not going to say yes or no because I think it depends on the individual example.
Yeah. And I think the problem will come back to, for accountants, we distribute $416 to a child. Then are we doing a CDD on a kid that's 8 years old that's got $400?
No, you're not going to do CDD on minors. No.
Do
IDNB, sorry.
Sorry?
You don't do IDNB on minors. I need to check what the age limit is though, whether it's 18 or
risk control. How much control are they going to have and risk? Like, again. It's all coming back to the same conversation sort of points, isn't it? There is a process. There is a manual around that. I just need to bring up the questions, Ags.
Yep.
There's only one question here. Should I do a police ID check for all existing staff as a part of AML? We do it as a part of onboarding now, but some staff have been around for 10 years. So
to answer that. So yeah, so I think I know. So in terms of staff members that needs to be screened, all staff members who are involved in the compliance or the delivery of regulated services must be screened. So if they're not involved in the compliance or the delivery of the regulated regulated services, you don't need to screen them. So anyone in the compliance chain or the chain of provision of the services should be screened.
Excellent. So team members need to be screened if they're a part of my AML process. So I'm just
which includes obviously provision of the services. So that's so that's anyone who deals with the client or who provides support in terms of operations for the client.
Excellent. I'm just trying to bring up the other questions, Ags. 2 seconds. Yeah. Someone's asked about designated services on registered office. If you are the registered office for a client, then yes, you need to do AML checks on them ongoing. First enrolling with AUSTRAC, you choose the compliance officer. It says, I have 14 days to notify AUSTRAC who my compliance officer is. If that's not already taken care of by enrolling. Yeah, you probably should enroll when you know who your compliance officer is going to be. Is that fair to say, Ags?
Yes, you need a compliance officer as part of the enrollment process. Yep. So, and just somebody, Atomic Business Advisors asked, what about offshore team? If your offshore team is part of your legal entity structure that's operating in Australia and they're part of your workflow, doesn't matter where they're sitting, they're still part of your team. So yeah, you need to do full screening on them. Yep.
Someone asked if they need to update their forms and things in Seamlss, but AUSTRAC templates include a lot of the information you're already gathering in Seamlss already, and we will be adding more over time. So you shouldn't have to do anything else there. What about offshore team? Well, I think it's the same deal, isn't it? If they're in your team, then you need to do an AML check. It's an IDV check. Just run them through like an ID check on Seamlss, wouldn't it? It'd be the same.
Well, they must be screened and trained in the same way and standard as your onshore staff. So however you're training your onshore staff, your offshore staff must be treated in the same way. It doesn't matter. Like they're part of your legal entity, they're part of your processes. It doesn't matter where they sit.
Yeah, and like do you do PEPs and sanction screens on these or just IDV?
You don't. So they have to go through police checks. So the police checks would determine certainly, whether you'd have any criminal records.
Okay. I think one of the other questions I had for you, Ags, was around the getting your stuff together. There seems to be a bit of confusion around how easy it is to set it all up and stuff, especially with the bigger firms. Just getting going with AML. A lot of people seem to think the process is just the same. I just push a button and it just happens. Like, especially with trusts, they are convoluted and complex and tricky. And yes, we make it look easy. I don't think it is that easy though. Like you do need to have some steps and some thoughts and some framing around it.
Yeah, look, I've done the immersion day with a couple of clients, and I'm also doing like a deeper 4-5 1-hour sessions with the teams, with their client support teams. And there is a lot to cover because the Act and the rules get you to here, but then you need to understand what that means and how does that translate into your own framework and into your own risk appetite, and then how that translate into your processes and technology. So I just think a lot of people think that maybe technology is the solution, and then they read the obligation, but it's just more complex. It is probably the most complex legislation because it permeates your workflows so much in your day-to-day business. It's not just like put it in this corner and these guys will sort with it, whether they're lawyers or whether they're, compliance people. Sometimes it's the same, right? So this is where the banks have come afoul, because they really didn't understand for a long time that this legislation cuts your business front to back. And everyone in that chain needs to understand, especially the guys at the top, need to understand what it means. And I think it's that translation, and it will permeate. But you just, I suppose, you want to be setting stuff up from the right way from the first go, because fixing things later is painful.
I'm probably a bit of that problem where I'm like, oh, 80-90% would be easy. But I think the problem is when you tick the box and it comes back as, it's low, most will come back low. But when it gets high, that's when it's going to be tricky. And your team need to be all over those medium high positions, because if they stuff it up, you're in a bit of trouble. Yeah,
and look, and again, it may be that you never have this complexity and this red, right? But you probably will, right, at some point. And then you need to understand your obligations to report, like suspicious matter reports, the different red flags, and then how you communicate back to the client, all of that. Like, I did a little handout, and I handed it to like a client about that. And I think they had no idea around the different the different things that you need to create a suspicious matter for, because essentially for suspicious matters, you need to anything that could be conceived that is deemed a criminal offence by the Commonwealth. So that includes tax evasion, that includes any other criminal activities, not just money laundering, right? So suspicious matter reports is quite a broad obligation, it includes fraud, identity fraud plus other fraud, internal, any kind of issues that you see that your customer might be in any kind of nefarious activities. You need to provide a suspicious matter report on that. So that isn't as clear in the way that the Act is, I think, structured.
Agreed. How to identify minor beneficiaries? Is it needed? We talked about minors, and I think you're talking about underage individuals. How do I ID beneficiaries that are incapacitated, e.g. disabled? How does special disability trust? How do you ID someone that can't be ID'd? Like, again, that'd be a risk assessment. But somebody, I think at the end of the day, if someone's incapacitated and you've got a disability trust, someone is in control of that person. So if I'm the disabled person and Ellen is the person that's got power of attorney, you would be doing the power of attorney person. Someone's signing off on that deed. Like, what was that thing you said? You got to get to the beneficial
arms and legs.
No, like, you've got to go down to who the BO is, who has the control, who has the ownership, who is the, like, although the disabled person might be the beneficiary, they are not the controlling person. Is that right, Ags? That makes sense?
Yeah. Especially when there's something like a POA, right? Power of attorney. It kind of says it all. They have a controlling and vested interest in that individual or entity. You've got to understand all those POAs and the people who are on the POAs. So yeah, that's a really good point, Clayton. Really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and drill down to see who the owner is, who has control. Like, it may not be the ownership, and I think that's the problem. Is it always talks about BO everywhere, beneficial owner, but it's who has the control, isn't it? The ultimate control.
The term is UBO. UBO, ultimate beneficial owner, is where you need to drill down to. The controlling aspect is something separate.
Right.
However, a lot of the times they're tied together.
Same, but different. But yeah, I feel like the person with the power of attorney is the person with the control.
Correct.
So
yeah.
What about looking at the trustees? Do we need to do anything analysis of trustees and onboarding a trust of clients? Do we need to be looking at specific income clauses? That sounds like a tax problem, not an AML problem. Unless you're trying to cheat the tax government out, and then you've got evasion clauses would kick in, but you should be doing that anyway. So that sounds like a ridiculous hypothetical that we're not going to answer. No, don't look at the trust deed clauses. You're looking at, again, beneficial ownership, UBO, ultimate beneficial ownership, and that risk. That is all about risk, not about what's in the clauses. If the engagement is declined after running these checks, do other accountants charge for this? I think this is one of the things that we're going to be looking at is to add a onboarding fee to Seamlss, but I definitely think that as a part of your triaging process, if you can already see some red flags in there, maybe you should have an onboarding fee. Do you see many onboarding fees with different other verticals in the AML space, Ags?
Certainly, the onboarding fees have been included as part of the service fees in banking for the higher end clients. So the high net worth, investment banking, maybe high end commercial. We've certainly seen that in the past where when AML checks got more stringent overseas, we were looking at load balancing that across the fee structure, but it's more on the high end stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So people should definitely be looking to factor that in. And we're definitely looking to factor it into Seamlss as a part of the process. But yes, even in my firm, I think that a part of my triage process will determine if they look like they're going to cost me more time and money. I'm definitely going to be charging more for it. I think overall, the lower end spectrum of clients, you'll just factor that into the prices we already charge in my mind, like putting our prices up for the additional work we need to do over the years. But I feel like if I'm going to do a deeper enhanced CDD, I'm not paying for that.
I mean, you might also load balance that over 6 months, right? So like start running the process, see what it looks like, see what the actual costs are and how that fits into your operating budget, right? Because if you don't charge, that might be it might be a good selling point for yourself, right? USP, like we've absorbed all the costs, you might be getting charged by others, but you know, we want to make sure that you have a great service, yada, yada, right? So how do you utilize this to sell more to clients by by making it easy, by making it a bit more frictionless, but also saying that you were actually protecting you as well because we have such a great stringent checks, and you're not paying for it. Or however, that's certainly from a banking perspective, we were looking at how, because we have more information about a client, how do we grow that relationship and grow the wallet, which is a banking thing. Yeah.
I think we can wrap it up from here, Ags, if you're happy to. Is there any questions that anyone else has got? But we've tentatively put in Thursday, the 18th of June. We may have some other more exciting things coming up. So we'll work out that 18th of June option. But if you've got any other questions or topics that you'd like us to cover, and whether we do another forum number 9, hopefully everyone's getting some value. We've got lots of people and lots of good feedback, but we definitely need more of that. If you haven't tried Seamlss, jump on, try it. That's why you've heard about it. But more than anything, if you need that help, put your hand up ASAP for Ags. If you want anything in that regards, reach out to Ags ASAP because, yeah, it's getting to crunch time and you're going to miss out. So, yeah.
One thing we were thinking of hosting, Clayton, and maybe we mention it here, is like a paid training session where we spend 2 to 5 hours with smaller groups of numbers where we walk through stuff so we walk through a lot of things in a bit more detail. So it would be a bit of a group training session, but it would certainly be cheaper than paying for me one-on-one, which could be useful. I think
it's more of that peace of mind. If you would be interested in that, by all means, reach out to us. But we'll definitely be looking at what we can do a little bit different in June to assist firms, and a part of that is most likely some sort of paid hand-holding session step through. But yeah, we're going to work out what that's going to look like and whether there is demand for it. Appreciate all your time. Thank you so much, Agnieszka. That's been amazing today. Thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you very much, Clayton. Thanks, everyone. I hope this was useful, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Enjoy. Hopefully you're all meeting your deadlines. See you later.
Bye.